Standing in the new Tretiakov in Moscow, Russia, in front of Kazimir Malevich's Black Square from 1915. Why is this art? Why is this in a museum? It's a black square with a white border around it.
I have no idea. He must have been trying to make a statement of some sort.
He was making a very profound statement. This is, just like Kandinsky, Malevich was one of the pioneers of abstract art. And this was his, in a way, manifesto in paint about abstract art. This is his way of saying what matters in a painting is the paint, and it doesn't matter what else. To depict anything but paint on the surface of a painting is to try to recreate something, whereas this is just creating it as opposed to recreating it. It's not trying to create
an image of something else.
It's not an image.
It's in and of itself.
Yes, it is it in and of itself. It exists as paint, and he really worked hard to make it a particular surface. If you look at it closely, you see the very careful brush strokes. You see in the black all of this crackling in various different ways. It's not crackled all over. There are spots where it's clearly more crackled, less crackled, and this is not it is an accident, but it's not necessarily an unintentional accident. Malevich knew how to work with paint. He knew that if one applied paint to an already wet surface, so it had paint underneath of it, because you can see between the cracks there are different colors behind it.
I've never noticed that in the portrayals in the books or the postcards, that the crackling has a faint color behind it.
There is something going on behind it. So he put the wet black paint on top of those surfaces that were already still a little bit wet, and he knew that was going to create, he probably knew that was going to create this kind of interesting texture, this interesting surface. And part of what was very interesting to Malevich, to many other avant-garde artists, was thinking about the nature of the materials that they were working with.
Well, I think it's interesting that is a process that would happen over time.
Yes.
As the layers dried at different rates, over maybe a very long period of time, that the nature of the texture of the surface would be different every time someone looked at it.
And it actually makes it extremely difficult for conservators, for curators, to preserve this work because of it's a very fragile nature, which makes it very interesting to me. That fragility, that very delicate nature of something that's so bold and stark and strong in terms of the composition of it. It's this dichotomy between something that's very, aggressive almost. I think a lot of people perceive the black square as very aggressive. The balance between that and the actual nature of the physical object, which is very delicate.
I could do this with fabric and thread.
But could you?
I could say the fabric and the thread are what they are.
They are, yes.
And they go together in a particular way, and you could see in it what you want to see in it, or see nothing in it. But if I tried to do this in fabric and thread, I would be recreating something as opposed to creating an it.
Perhaps. And you would not be the first one to do it. That is part of the significance. For many people, the significance of this is that nobody else did this before he did it. And that argument falls a little flat for me. I don't fully appreciate that the fact that he's the first one that thought of doing it, I mean, that's interesting. But for me, what is interesting about this work of art is what it is now, even though many other people have done abstract works of art since him.
When I have seen pictures of this, I have never perceived that the white border was part of his painting. I always thought it was whoever was making the illustration was putting a white border around it.
Mm-hmm.
I never realized it was actually there.
It is definitely created by him and intentional and painted. It's not just the canvas, it's actually paint. And it's a very particular paint too. It's not just white, it's almost grayish in places. Now, when Malevich first exhibited this work of art, it was at a exhibition with several other artists. He had one room in that exhibition space, and this particular painting he put up in the corner of the room, in the place where in a traditional Russian home an icon would have gone. And so he is making a gesture with that particular placement, that curating of his own work, of what this work signifies
For him.
for him. And for many people, that gesture was extremely offensive.
I would think so.
Because it's an empty space, it's a black square, it's not an icon. But for him, I think that he was not being disingenuous. He was being honest about how strongly he felt about the importance of making art.
It was iconic for him.
It was iconic for him. It was his icon.
It was not religious iconic, but it was iconic in the sense that it's what he wanted to convey and communicate.
Mm-hmm. And for him, his system of painting, his artistic philosophy of suprematism, that was the philosophy that he came up with. It was, in a way, a religious system for him.
Mm-hmm.
And this square stood as the foundation for the whole system of painting which he would create. Which, that statement in and of itself is somewhat problematic, what I just said, because in fact we know that he said that the black square was the foundation upon which suprematism stood, and that the first creation of suprematism was this black square. However, we know that in fact, judging or using scientific methods, that he actually created many other of his abstract works of suprematist art prior to painting the black square. But
foundation doesn't necessarily mean the first.
Not necessarily. And certainly the idea in his mind probably was there. And that was what led to the abstract system. But Malevich likes to play with dates, and so one of the things that does come up is this claim towards the originality of and the genesis of suprematism from this particular painting, and that's more of a creation on his part than necessarily a chronological fact.
Mm-hmm. So the 1915 dating here in the museum.
That is correct. That is when he
verified.
Yeah, that is
we
when
know that to be true.
We know that is when he painted this particular painting. He claimed to have painted it 2 years earlier, but there's really not a lot of evidence that supports that he actually did that. I think that for a lot of people hate this painting, and I think that you really have to stand in front of it and experience it as a physical object and look at it closely to really begin to understand it, because I don't think that it really is done justice in photographic reproductions.
But not too closely.
But not too closely, because you might get yelled at.